Welcome to the Feds, insiders bringing accountability, integrity, and reform to a broken bureaucracy. At Feds for Freedom, we value constructive dissent and healthy debate. The views and opinions shared in today's episode are those of the speaker alone and do not express the views or opinions of the U.S. government or any other employer.
Welcome back to this week's episode of The Feds. I am Stephanie Weidel. What's the deal with tick-borne illnesses? Why is it such a hush-hush topic? What is Lyme? Why are doctors so hesitant to seek out alternative approaches in treating it? And why are patients so often gaslit, with some doctors claiming their symptoms are all in their heads? Well, today we are speaking with Skylar Shook, who is a health consultant and strategist who has supported the healing efforts of patients with vector-borne diseases, including Lyme disease, for more than 2 decades through advocacy, education, medical practice management, and lobbying at the state and federal level. Sky, thank you so much for joining me today.
Well, I'm happy to be here.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I'm glad we live close to each other.
Yeah.
So today I wanted to talk about tick-borne illnesses, and in particular Lyme, as Lyme is the most popular tick-borne illness that people seem to hone in on. Often we hear of Lyme, but there's way more than that. And for years, I have been astounded, as well as many others, at the different symptoms of Lyme. I mean, you've got inflammation, you've got neurological disorders. I mean, there's a host of symptoms that seem to all go back to perhaps a Lyme diagnosis. But more often than not, doctors don't recognize it as a problem. In fact, patients are often gaslit, and doctors say all of the symptoms are in your head. I mean, this happens often. I know several people this has happened to. So during COVID, many citizens and holistic practitioners drew a connection between the treatments and symptoms of Lyme to those of COVID and all of the oddities there. So today I thought we would dive into tick-borne illness, and you seem to know a lot about this. Would you tell us your story and how you got involved with Lyme patient advocacy?
Yes, of course. First off, I would like to say I'm not a physician. I don't have medical training, so everything that I share is based upon my experience in a variety of capacities. My wife, she did Army ROTC at Johns Hopkins, and she'd grown up in the military, and that was what she wanted to do. She wanted to serve in the military. And during probably a number of training events on the East Coast, and possibly one at Fort Lewis, she got tick bites. And there were other members of her unit that grew up in Lyme endemic areas that understood what the early symptoms might look like and sought treatment from their local family doctor, and then recovered because they had adequate treatment. My wife didn't have that context, and so she just kind of gutted it out. She had recurrent sinus infections, bronchial infections, things like that, where she went to the Student Health Center for help. But it was always just kind of partial treatments and really for the wrong thing, which led to kind of chronic illness, starting to have more difficulty with school. She went from being a straight A student, maxing all of the military standards, and being an athlete, to needing to walk with a cane and having a really hard time. She switched from pre-med to political science and basically just gutted it out through the finish line to graduate. But it was all due to tick-borne illness.
Wow. So, that's an example right there of not treating it. It's not recognized, and so it just spirals. Okay, so what eventually helped her? Because I just met her, and she seems kind of spry and healthy. And
yeah, well, a lot of different things helped, and a lot of things that didn't help led us to other things that did. But we spent 15 years finding different practitioners that were grounded in different philosophies, or had different experiences treating people that had been sick with tick-borne illnesses for a long time, that met with success. And so we continued to evolve our understanding of health and well-being and what getting sick with an illness like that can look like. and what some of the options were for recovery.
Mhm. Now, when did you come into the picture? Did you know her before the Lyme?
Yes, I did. I knew her. We were friends. We'd gone to school in different states, but we were friends and had always been in touch. And then after we finished school, she had gotten sick, and basically the approach was, okay, we'll deal with this, and then we'll get on with our lives. We didn't know that it would take 15 years and moving all over the place to find better care.
Yes.
But that's what it took, and so that's what.
Wait a minute. You moved to find better care for her.
Oh yeah.
Okay, so what are some of the techniques you all used to help heal her?
Well, at first, it was just finding doctors that had a better understanding and awareness of Lyme disease, which is really an overly simplified target term for describing all of the different pathogens you can be exposed to through a tick bite. But having doctors that understood that and how to begin treating it was the key. Finding those people first. And then a lot of her early treatment was focused on antibiotics, a lot of different antibiotic combinations, 10 months of IV antibiotics, but without a lot of support for detoxification or repopulating the gut microbiome. So there were a lot of other difficulties that came as a consequence of that. But a lot of it was just treatment by MDs early on that then moved to naturopaths and herbalists and homeopaths and people that practice visceral manipulation for aid with detoxification. And there was a wonderful traditional Chinese medicine practitioner in Vermont that was really great at beginning the restorative process after all of the killing of pathogens had been done, then restoring her system and trying to work towards balance.
And how do you restore a system? Like literally your gut has been gutted. And so how do you help restore? And this would go into not only Lyme issues, but vaccine injury as well, because we know that is in part a gut issue. Go ahead.
Well, and also what we eat on a daily basis. And I think that's part of what informs how sick people can become is because generally speaking, as a nation, we eat very low quality foods and are chronically exposing our guts to toxins that should not be there. And then we have either consequences from that, or we're primed to then be more susceptible to other diseases or pathogens that we're exposed to. So to answer your question regarding a treatment with antibiotics, being on probiotics or eating probiotic foods, if one is able to tolerate them, depending on their state of health, that's kind of a good first strategy. And also spending time outside and interacting with other people and other living organisms and, being in the dirt. It's what humans do. And unfortunately, when people become chronically ill, they retreat from that human experience and kind of become their illness, and everything becomes pathologized. And so it's a dynamic that has to be worked across. And part of the healing is returning to that. But it's a complicated way of answering your question, but there are a lot of supplements, probiotics, foods that can be beneficial in restoring the gut microbiome and just addressing the affront of the antibiotics, because those also are not very targeted. They kind of kill everything.
Yeah, you brought up two really good points. One, just get in the dirt, because there's good bacteria in the dirt that can help restore yourself. It's a really good point. And the second was this, and we can get into this a little later, but just maybe touch on a little bit more of the state of sickness, that this can become a mental state, that you just continue on in the sickness. Like it almost becomes an identity. We all fall into that. Like even if you have and I'm going through an ankle injury, so the way that you walk, it all becomes, it's a new normal. And once you start healing, it's almost hard to break that way of walking.
Yeah.
So would you just talk a little bit more about that mental state of sickness?
Yeah, I would say even focusing on the sickness is part of the problem, because we're all, and to assign it only to a mental uh, experience, because we're constantly existing on multiple levels, and more often than not, we focus on the physical, maybe a little bit of the emotional, but people are they run from that oftentimes. But being alive means that we're constantly experiencing the world in ways that we don't always pay attention to. But when someone does get boxed into a reality where they're constantly in pain, they're constantly struggling, that does kind of define their existence. And so finding ways to not be defined by the illness while also accepting what's going on and working to overcome it, I think that's an important and nuanced thing that you can't always do when you're in chronic pain and struggling to find your car keys. But it's important. It's important to be aware of that.
Did you see your wife go through that?
Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, she's an extremely intelligent individual, just one of the best people I know. And, yeah, early on when she was really dealing with, the illness acutely and all of the symptoms, I mean, really, I needed to be with her for every appointment. Even, and I've seen this a lot with other patients over time, where you might have a chronic migraine level head pain, but then go into the doctor and forget to mention it. Even though that's a daily experience, a constant experience, because of the cognitive dysfunction that can come along, or the brain fog. So, yeah, my wife experienced that, and
And-
a lot of people did.
And what kind of broke her out of this state of sickness? Because she doesn't carry herself like that.
Well, and she's not. And
Right.
and I also think that there's kind of a baseline problem that we have, which is thinking of things in a binary fashion. You're either sick or you're well. And that misses the point. I didn't get to sleep until 3 a.m. last night, and I'm well, but I am not functioning on all cylinders. I'm not my best, most dynamic self this morning. But if I just say, oh, well, I'm well, I mean, that's accurate, but it's an oversimplification. And I think that's what we tend to do generally. And especially when we talk about tick-borne illness and Lyme. Lyme is an oversimplification of the huge array of tick-borne, vector-borne pathogens we can be exposed to. So how do you break out of the perspective of being sick? I think it's just, it can be kind of a grind. It's a gradual process. And you have to remind yourself what you're doing here on earth, what you find your mission, and find what matters, and then anchor yourself to that every day, whether that be your religion or meditation or finding beauty even amongst all of the difficulties. I think that's the necessary thing that everyone has to do, whether they conceive of themselves as sick or unwell, or healthy, because that's part of the human experience.
Well, you seem to know a lot about looking at health from a different perspective, but in particular about tick-borne illness. So let's go there.
Okay.
So what is tick-borne illness? Like, what is the history behind it? How did that happen?
Well, I'm no expert on on all of the pathogens, but I've spent 20 years dedicated to this. And so my best explanation would be that, the spirochete, the Lyme spirochete, which is in the most narrowest sense, Lyme, it's a corkscrew-shaped bacteria that is similar to syphilis. It can, using its shape, can propel itself through tissue, can find safe harbors to avoid the immune system, and protect itself. That has been very useful over time, so that I think as far back as we can go in the fossil record, I believe we've found Lyme spirochetes or Borrelia species. They're very adaptive. That has always been a part of the human experience.
Hmm.
Lewis and Clark, in their core of discovery, they recognized that some people got a tick fever when receiving a tick bite, and it was something that they were aware of. So there is that part of thing, the kind of human history part, and then there's newer chapters of what a tick-borne illness, basically a tick-borne being that if a tick bites you, it's essentially, as it feeds, transmitting pathogens from its gut into your body, usually having been picked up from a rodent or some other animal that it fed on in a previous life stage. So it's kind of like getting a mini bacterial transfusion from a rodent into our bodies, and then we have to deal with the consequences of that. Always return to how someone's feeling, what things will help them, and not telling people what will help them, but helping them decide what they feel best about.
Right.
Because ultimately, everyone's lived experience is far different, no matter what commonalities we have, especially when it comes to health. Most people know best for themselves what they should do.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's talk about the symptoms beyond what I mentioned of what people would call Lyme. And again, you've said that is very narrow, very narrow term for tick-borne illness.
Yeah.
But what are some of the symptoms beyond inflammation?
Well,
go ahead.
Early on with a tick bite, and if it is positive for Lyme, you can have head pain, brain fogginess, sleep dysfunction. The most common symptom specific to Lyme, which only occurs in a certain percentage of people, is a bullseye rash. That's definitive for Lyme. But there are a lot of different types of rashes. Sometimes you don't see them. Sometimes they don't appear. Bullseye rash, migrating joint pain. How there can also be almost immediate neuropsych symptoms. And there are many people that their first inclination that something's wrong is a behavioral change. That's something that is especially important for parents to be aware of children's behaviors that live in Lyme endemic areas, to kind of try to pick up on that early on.
That's a good point. So, what do you believe tick-borne illness is? Or in this case, Lyme is. And this is why people may be asking, why am I having Sky on to talk about Lyme? Because it's somehow has something to do with the government. We know, right? There's something fishy here, but we don't know what. So what do you think Lyme is, and what are the different theories? Explain the theories and what you think it is.
Well, what I think it is doesn't matter. And the government is involved with everything.
Isn't that terrible?
And government transparency, or the lack thereof, is an issue. And I think we oversimplify this conversation into pieces that don't really fit together well. There is the natural history and evolution of Lyme bacteria and other tick-borne illnesses. There are two great books that I always recommend people look to and really read up on as a part of this discussion. One is Lab 257 by an author named Michael Carroll, who was an attorney from Long Island that had gotten sick and did a lot of investigation into possible origins of how Lyme and tick-borne illnesses can occur in our environment presently. There's also a great book by Chris Newby, who I believe was a Stanford medical research writer, and she and her family had become ill and eventually got better, but did a lot of research into the same topic. And that book is titled Bitten. I think the answer to what Lyme is and these pathogens are, we could get closer to with greater government transparency. We know that we have bioweapons programs that can either be looked at defensively or offensively. it doesn't mean that every tick is a bioweapon. I had a tick a couple weeks ago and sent it off for testing, and it tested negative for everything, which was great. Not every tick is infected with Lyme or another pathogen, but some are, and some are also full of a lot of things that we've never understood to be there, and there are questions about why those things are there.
Yeah.
So that's why I'm optimistic about our current administration's dedication towards transparency, that we get more answers from involved government agencies about how we can solve some of these problems that will positively affect everyone.
Do you think the government will be transparent enough to actually release some of this information?
Well, I think there are positive signs, but I don't know. I have the same question. I think it's everyone's responsibility
It is.
to ask for
Yeah.
transparency and ask for more information, and not necessarily in an adversarial way, but to invite partnership with the people that have access to information that might shed light on what's happening, and then to try to solve a problem in service of the American welfare.
Where does the transparency need to come from? Are we talking a DoD transparency and or an HHS transparency?
Both. And I think there could be other organizations, government organizations involved, and that will have to be comprehensive and dealt with organizationally. I feel good about some of the people that are now involved at HHS and in the administration that have been impacted personally by Lyme and tick-borne illnesses, that have a personal interest
Yes.
in solving this problem. But there are a lot of good, motivated people that work within the federal system that also want to be free to be of greater service. So
Yes.
that's something that I'm optimistic about.
Yeah. We just had the FDA approve the new Moderna shot for COVID shot for at-risk children from 6 months to 12 years. And we're all going like, what is this?
Yeah.
So I don't know.
Yeah, I think,
What are your thoughts on that?
well, I think for a long time, people weren't necessarily attentive to how the system worked and what government processes were. And people have taken a renewed interest in their responsibility, because ultimately when we let our responsibilities go, that's when things can happen, and we need to be more engaged and more involved. I haven't ever understood exactly how the sausage is made, in terms of healthcare policy and the interface with corporate interests. And I think that's something that, as people become more aware of that, they have less of an appetite for it, and they would like those relationships to be more transparent and to be directed at serving the common good above a corporate interest.
Yes. Well, it is interesting. There have been millions of people who have been standing up in the past 5 years screaming at the top of their lungs that this is not right. They have taken an interest. Millions of people take an interest. So it seems like that should be almost enough. I do wonder with the transparency part of it, why those particular agencies, especially HHS, has not come out ahead of the game saying this is our procedure. So we're being transparent ahead of it. And I certainly have been asking around, please, anyone come forward, tell me how these things work. Who actually approves? Who are the actual positions that approve a shot like this? And in an attempt for when this conversation comes up, we know that, we're actually receiving transparency. So it behooves HHS and DoD to get ahead of the game and come out talking about the route to approvals or
Yeah,
releasing information.
I think just it's hard to estimate to what degree there's an acceptance of an erosion of trust in government, in science.
Mm.
You know, I've worked for a magnificent man named Gerald Pollack, who's a professor of bioengineering at the University of Washington, who is a genius and does fantastic work. And his the funding for his lab and the research that he does, because it's not necessarily tapped into a pipeline for capitalizing financially on intellectual property. It's not funded in the same way. And so we have a real problem with how basic science is funded in our country, because if it's funded by people that are selling a product and they have discretion over what science makes it into the public sphere, then we have problems. And obviously that's, to me, it's a fairly obvious issue that needs to be addressed.
Yeah.
That also, I think, goes for transparency in government, that over time, there have been people in place that have protected their interests. And there's an evolving mentality about what public service is. And there's, people are much more educated and much more engaged, and demand a greater investment by our government in communicating what's going on. So
why would the government not be transparent about specifically Lyme? It seems that there has been perhaps some studies done. Why would the government not be transparent? And why is this such a hush-hush topic? Why in society is this so hush-hush? If someone, they have Lyme.
Well, it's funny because on so many levels, I think, not just at the government level, but we fail each other by not being transparent about things.
Right.
Like in upstate New York, I've never heard a realtor ever mention how bad the Lyme disease was in an area where they were selling a home, nor in the Mid-Atlantic. And I could very easily, not to speak for, I could very easily pass judgment on other people for what, their ethical hurdles that they cannot seem to get over. But the way that people can be affected or be on the hook for not taking responsibility in the first place, they want to avoid blame where really it's their responsibility that they're failing to take in terms of making sure that things are of service first to the public, if it's in the from a governance perspective, or being of service to humanity generally, if you're selling a product or property, or just bringing awareness to what someone's children might be exposed to if they go out in their backyard.
Now, you know how I feel about pesticides. We were talking on the phone. I saw the lawn guys come, and it's so terrible. I don't have control over that. I really need to go to the HOA and say, hey, the pesticides need to stop, because my especially my middle one, is so affected by pesticides. But he was starting to spray, and I ran out and I was screaming, no, not on my property. And but how do pesticides actually affect the tick population? Because a lot of people say, oh, you just spray for them.
Yeah. The answer, as is the case with most things generally, is much more involved and much more complicated, because we live in a dynamic environment that we want to oversimplify. We want to be efficient with where we put our energy and attention. When it comes to spraying for ticks, to the best of my knowledge, there were studies done maybe a decade ago that showed that if you spray repeatedly, you have near-term net positive effects of killing what's there. But then what comes in, because, with deer, unless you have an 8-foot fence to exclude deer will bring a large number of ticks in. They're kind of like the public transportation for ticks, where they'll just come through your yard, infected ticks can fall off, and then they're in your yard. And if it's an adult female and it lays eggs and hatches, and then they feed on rodents in the area, then all of a sudden you have a lot of ticks. So there's, again, instead of spraying, if you live in an environment that you can, I would, get guinea fowl or chickens, or promote, if you don't have horses, promoting possum. Possums are like little Roombas for ticks. They get covered in them. They groom themselves fastidiously.
Oh,
And so but the pesticide, the better option, I think, based upon experience, is you can get tick tubes that are full of treated cotton balls to put in your yard. I think you have to have a pesticide application license to do that, so you'd have to consult with a company. But you get tick tubes that are treated with, they have cotton balls in them that are treated with permethrin, which kills ticks. The rodents in your vicinity will take those back to their nest to use as nesting material. That then kills all the ticks that are on the rodents, and then you have much better results. But I think managing property to minimize tick exposure is an important step in keeping people safe at home. And really, ultimately, because of how much suffering I've seen people go through, I put a lot of my energy into education and looking at prevention, so that people can maybe just be bothered by, having their landscaping done differently, or putting up some taller fences so deer don't get in, and dealing with that headache rather than going down a potentially life-altering path with getting sick. So,
besides property management, what are other techniques you encourage people to use to prevent?
well, there are a lot of good websites that kind of offer a full picture. LymeDisease.org. It's, I think, the Bay Area Lyme disease group from California. They have a lot of good information on that. But if you're going to be outside, pre-treating your clothes with a permethrin spray, which will kill ticks on contact if they crawl onto you.
When I go to the store, what spray is that?
I'm not sure about, basically, if you went to like your hardware store or a home and garden store, they would probably have a repellent. Ticks will just crawl across, or it may do something. They might not try to hop a ride on you, but it won't kill them. And they can also crawl across the treated area to an untreated area. So you would just need to read the label for something with permethrin in it. There may be another chemical, but I always look for permethrin if I'm going to do that. More often than not, I just try to avoid exposures, and that's what I do with my family. I love being outside, not so much on the East Coast. And although the East Coast is not the only place where you have this issue, and it's continuing to become a bigger problem with wider geographic distribution.
I mean, the normal prevention people say is like wide brimmed hats, particular clothing, wear your hair up, not,
Yeah, those are good
hair.
things. Light colored clothing, tucking your pants into your socks, things.
So
of
you
that
look like a
nature.
geek when you're hiking?
Yeah, I mean, I would much prefer that than supper.
See?
But there are also some differences in ticks. So, like black-legged ticks or dog ticks. There are tick species that are more passive feeders, where they will engage in their questing behavior, go to the end of a leaf or grass, and kind of wait for a host to walk by. Lone star ticks, which are expanding their geographic distribution greatly, they will sense you and track you down from a distance. And they have unique pathogens in them that have been proven to exist that are disconcerting. And because of their aggressive feeding behavior, some of the usual prevention strategies aren't as useful. So if I were to go hiking in the mid-Atlantic or the Northeast, I would definitely pre-treat all of my stuff with a permethrin-based spray, let it dry, put it on, and then do that. But I spend most of my outdoor time on the East Coast during the winter. That's if it's below 32 degrees, they're inactive, and that's when I choose to be more active outside here.
Does the weather have anything to do with it? Like if we have a very mild winter, or the next summer, spring, summer, are the ticks more likely to be overpopulated?
Well, the best resource for answering that question is the Carey Institute of Ecosystem Studies in Millbrook, New York. There's a doctor who is quoted every May in every paper across the nation named Rick Osfeld. And they've been studying this for a long time, the ecology and the disease dynamics. And what they have found is that in years where there's like a bumper crop of acorns, where there's a lot of rain and it's good for acorn production or food mass material for rodents, that there's a good year for food. The next year that drives greater reproduction in the rodent species, which are the primary reservoir for the pathogens. So that means that 2 years, basically, there's greater acorn production. The next year, there's greater rodent availability to ticks as a host. And then the second year, there's a greater incident of disease in humans because the ticks feed on the rodents, get infected, and then the next life cycle feed on the human. So,
well, that's interesting.
Yeah. The Carey Institute has a lot of great resources about understanding that question.
How do you treat a tick-borne illness? Like, and I know you smile when I ask this question because I want like very specifics. And I know everyone's different. Everyone's got a very different makeup. What are some of the techniques you have found that may help people who have a tick-borne illness right now?
Well, I'll answer the first way that question struck me first. If someone gets a tick bite, the most important thing, in my opinion, is to carefully remove the tick and then to send it for testing. Because it's easier to test for pathogens in ticks than it is in humans. And there are a lot of reasons for that. But basically, if you can get the tick and you see the tick, getting that tested so that if you have symptoms that manifest, then you can kind of know the range of possibilities of what you're dealing with. How to treat people is something, from my perspective, it's finding people, practitioners that align with a patient's philosophy and understanding of health and well-being, and getting to those people sooner rather than later.
But most of the time, people are found pretty late.
Oftentimes, they are.
Yeah.
And in those instances, I direct people to ILADS. It's the International Lyme and Associated Disease Society. So it's a professional medical society composed primarily of healthcare practitioners that have a lot more experience treating patients with Lyme and associated vector-borne diseases, and then getting them well. There's a lot of there's a discrepancy between guidelines of how to treat. If there's a family physician that comes in, or a patient comes into their office with a history of a tick bite, they have a rash, they suspect it's Lyme disease, they will refer to guidelines that define how they're supposed to treat that, which in my experience, working with people that have been very, very sick, that have been treated by those guidelines, those guidelines fail to serve a lot of people. So ILADS, they have alternate treatment guidelines for treating with greater duration, primarily with antibiotics. So if you're somebody that are particularly sensitive to antibiotics or don't want to manage things in that way, there are also a lot of good herbalists and plant medicine type practitioners.
What specific herbs would be helpful in a case like this?
Well, again, I try not to make recommendations, but I personally, you can also go on preventive protocols, and children too. And there was a man named Stephen Herod Buhner who wrote a book called Healing Lyme, but he was a very productive herbalist and wrote extensively about a lot of things that we are faced with in our environment these days. But I believe astragalus is one herb, Japanese knotweed, which is an invasive that people often don't like on their property, but it has medicinal value. Stevia is also anti-Lyme. And I'm sure that I'm missing quite a few, but Stephen Harabuner is a great resource for that. Or just finding a good naturopathic doctor or herbalist that has a good understanding of this, because oftentimes their treatments are not as difficult to withstand for subsets of the patient population.
Yes.
But also sometimes, I don't like prejudicing people against something that may be helpful to them. So if a 2 to 4 week course of doxycycline is appropriate based upon a provider's recommendations, then it's better to do that, in my opinion.
What particular vitamins have helped?
Well, so that also, I think the way that I answer that is to look at people's overall health and what they're eating. I have some recommendations for people that you might talk to on this podcast in the future that can speak to our food. What you need to supplement is often informed by the quality of the food that you're eating and the nutritional density. So it's another one. There's so much that's contextual that people, and I don't fault people for this, but we want simpler answers. But we live in a highly dynamic, complex world. And so, I mean, just generally speaking, also to try to answer your question, the guidance that the Weston A. Price Foundation gives of how to eat. And
nutrient-dense foods.
Yes.
Yep.
That nourishing the body in an appropriate way, the body will function as it needs to as it interfaces with the environments that we're exposed or that we are a part of.
But when you're dealing with like high inflammation, for sure, the nourishing foods, it would something like, well, you've mentioned, and we're going to get to it as well, but vitamin B. So what other vitamins like that would something like, what other inflammatories? Turmeric? So have you found that is helpful?
I think it can be. And I'm sorry not to be real direct with the answers. It can be. And B vitamins are great, especially if you have a genetic profile where you don't methylate well and you need your B vitamin supplementation to aid your detoxification, then that can be crucial. I've had pediatricians that are well aware of, or have worked with Lyme patients and families in Lyme endemic areas, that they highly suggest that upping your B vitamins, which if there's excess, they're eliminated through the urine, so it's not an issue of toxicity from their perspective. Having appropriate levels of B vitamins will help make one less attractive to a vector, to a tick, to a mosquito, and so that's an important consideration.
Now, my doctor, Dr. Fletcher, who we've had on this podcast, talked about Lyme treatments and her use of ivermectin way before COVID. She was using ivermectin for years, so she just took this. She said, "Well, I'm going to try out ivermectin on COVID." Have you found in the people that you've worked with, just advocating for them, that is a typical way of, or a typical alternative?
Well, in the medical practices that I have managed in different parts of the country, that managed the care for chronically ill patients, hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin were kind of essential tools to what they did. So yeah, with the COVID experience, I thought it very peculiar that those options were regarded in the way that they were, because for a very long time they'd had therapeutic value that's proven and published, and so it's always been, before 2019, it was a valuable tool. So I don't know why it wouldn't still be.
Okay, so you touched on ways to keep yourself from being so attractive to ticks. One being keeping your B vitamin up. What else would make yourself less attractive to a tick?
Well, what I can say that I've seen studies about and have anecdotal evidence on is like oil of eucalyptus. If you want a more natural remedy, it basically covers your scent and makes you invisible, because the way that ticks sense you is through your carbon dioxide footprint, your heat, and they have organs on their front legs that they use to sense mammalian hosts. So you're essentially making yourself invisible. It's not so much that you're repelling them, it's that you're making them not recognize you. So eucalyptus oil, and there are a lot of other blends that some people like better than others. Or DEET is recommended. I'm not a big fan of the chemical exposures, and also that if you're going to spray something on your clothing or on your skin that is not of natural origin, I tend to I think that in recommending chemicals to solve problems, we end up contributing to other problems. So
For
if
sure.
you're scared of ticks, if you're in a Lyme endemic area and you're constantly slathering your children in DEET, while they can say that it's safe to utilize, they haven't tested if it's safe to utilize 4 months out of the year with heavy exposure, and what are the consequences of that, and how does it interact with other chemicals in your body.
Yes.
So I tend to look at managing the environment and then utilizing more natural remedies to or natural solutions to try to avoid the tick interaction.
Once there is a tick bite, is there some genetic makeup that makes someone more easily able to work through an infection and not have such bad symptoms?
I don't know if it's genetics per se. I think it's health and vitality.
Okay.
And because even so, my wife, when she got tick bites, she was in top physical shape. She was, doing her athletic and military training constantly.
Right. She was healthy.
She was able to better manage what was going on. But just speaking of the Lyme spirochete specifically, there are electron microscopic images of them destroying white blood cells. They are immunosuppressive. So over time, managing an infection like that becomes harder and harder. And I know of people that had, gotten treatment for a Lyme disease diagnosis that were, pretty stable, and then had a trauma like a car accident or broke a bone. And then all of a sudden they were dealing with an active infection. And that speaks to the inner dynamics of our immune system and how we function.
I heard multiple people talk about COVID, how it triggered their Lyme symptoms. So whether that was COVID itself, but they had Lyme in the past. Most of the symptoms had gone away. They had gotten sick in the meantime with colds and, baby flu, whatever. Just regular illnesses. But yet COVID triggered, astronomical problems. What is that?
Well, my first response would be that we're always trying to find and define the problem, and that's where we miss the opportunity to be well. So yes, but it's common. I've heard that repeatedly, and there's some upcoming work that's going to be published about commonalities between more Lyme disease with elements of chronicity and long COVID. I think if you look comprehensively at all of the inputs for health or for disease and manage those, you start on, you start building health rather than focusing on the ailment. Which is not to discount that, my Lyme, the same symptoms that I experienced when I had Lyme have come back. It's I think more productive to then look at what those symptoms are telling you. Because even somebody who has like an acute case of Lyme disease and then becomes very ill, their healing is more like peeling away layers to an onion, where you address something, and then once that addressed, there's something else to address. And I think that's more common. So when somebody's been sick with Lyme and then something else happens and they have symptoms, if you call it Lyme, there will be someone to tell you it's not Lyme. But if you describe your symptom picture to a practitioner that is really listening to you, then they will utilize their knowledge to understand your system and then try to offer remedies.
How do you find a practitioner like that easily? Is there a place on the internet you can go to see all of the Lyme doctors?
ILADS, the ILADS group
Okay.
has a good tool for recommending practitioners. But also those are just recommendations. And there are other people. I think that ILADS now has naturopaths in their membership, but depending on what state you live in and a naturopath's scope of practice, I mean, there can be some really great naturopathic doctors that are more experienced and calibrated to what people may want from their healthcare provider. But it's not easy.
Mm-hmm.
And I think over the last couple of years, there have been efforts, and especially now, there are efforts to try to make that information more available about how people can find the type of care that they want.
Yes.
But it's not easy, but that's also part of it. For me, in my wife's and my experience, all of the most difficult things have given rise to very good things. And so that's one of those things that I think falls into that category, that the struggle to find who you need is an important part of developing more agency over your own health and well-being.
Just again, touching on the other factors that may make a Lyme patient more sick. Are there environmental factors? I've heard that mold might be a huge factor for making you just the particular symptoms blow up. Food, you've mentioned making sure you have nutritious food, but have you heard of the Lyme connection or the mold connection with Lyme?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there are a lot of things like that,
Mm-hmm.
that once somebody experiences a substantive inflammatory condition, then you have to start managing all of the other things that drive inflammation.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the things, I don't know if I think this addresses in some way your question, a dental care. And
Yes.
that is a huge thing. And some of the most successful practitioners that I've worked with or supported patients that were seeing them, one of the first things they look at is that, because yes, you can have a lot of a toxicity through your food, through your environment, but if you have metals that are placed in your mouth that have to be disposed of as hazardous waste if they are removed, you then have to ask yourselves the question, like, well, is this good being in my mouth? There are two great organizations. One is IAOMT and the other is IABDM. Those are dental associations that deal with toxicity and health around the practice of dentistry.
So when someone is diagnosed, like, we don't like diagnoses here, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if someone is diagnosed with Lyme, you're saying don't just stop with this is a tick-borne illness. Look at everything else. Look at your teeth. Look at the environment that is around you. Look at what you're sleeping next to. You've mentioned the EMFs before. So you're basically saying don't just stop with the tick. Look elsewhere. And that is going to help you heal. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. And it points out the complexities of the lived experience as humans. And, even like EMFs, that is a reductionist term to kind of cover all sorts of biophysically relevant exposures that we have. And I liked physics when I took it, but I prefer not to be such a student of it now. But, if you can talk to people about, okay, there's an implicit understanding if you live in under a power line, that there have been proven health consequences to living in proximity to a power line because of the electromagnetic exposure. But there's a difference between if you're exposed to, if you live near a cell tower and your genetic makeup and your ability to repair DNA damage. These are it's a very big topic unto itself. But if you want to live as long and as vital a life as you can, then looking to these things are, it's worth considering and worth learning more about. But again, reducing it all down to one term and then offering one solution, whether it be a medication or a supplement, I think misses the mark. And then you end up with similar problems that you could have fixed through one experience, but didn't, because you weren't as thorough as possible.
Right. Well, you're like the ultimate alternative, Sky, looking at health through a very alternative lens.
Well, I think we need to look at things differently,
Yes.
and not just our health. And we need, and it's not to say the things that I know that are more uncommon, I've seen them be more powerful in people's lives than very available things. I've also seen people not respond. I've seen people respond very well to homeopathic treatment. And then I've heard homeopaths that, you know, have a strategy for treating Lyme, but it's really Lyme and Babesia and Ehrlichia and Bartonella that all came through the same tick bite. And oftentimes that perspective or that approach will fail because they're not dealing with something that might um, eh, occur naturally in our environment.
Yeah, could you just discuss all of these other tick-borne illnesses that is never discussed? And you mentioned the new alpha-gal, which, I mean, I don't know very much about that, but would you just touch on this?
Yeah, well, so alpha-gal in particular, I know there's an effort right now in Congress to label it as an allergen. I think it's the 10th most common allergen. And what it is a sugar molecule that's found in animal tissue. So most people refer to it as a red meat allergy, but really it's an allergic reaction to that sugar molecule, which is known as alpha-gal. Um, you can't test for it in the ticks because it's ever present in tick saliva. And so from my understanding, there is a lack of understanding at this point of how people are becoming allergic to that.
And how did they discover this? I mean, people just started having allergic reactions to meat?
Yeah, I don't know exactly how they've discovered it because it's become more common recently. It's something that I never dealt with or met anyone. And then since spending a lot of time in DC, a lot of congressional staffers they're like, oh yeah, I moved here from Idaho or Colorado and we don't have many ticks there, but we went out hiking and now my friend has alpha-gal. They and it's more predominant than you might suspect.
Is this a DC thing?
No, because it's happening other places. It's from my understanding, it is more associated and possibly exclusively associated with the Lone Star tick, which is expanding its range, and that's the tick that is more aggressive in its feeding behavior.
So I kind of laugh because we're in this, more wellness. I am in this more wellness space, and looking at the food we eat, trying to eat more wholesome foods, limit the packaged foods. But yet, I have a husband who's allergic to beans. He's allergic to nuts. He's allergic to coconut. He's allergic to really healthy things.
Mm-hmm.
Then you have these other people who are now allergic to meat. And we have all these carnivores out there doing this like solely meat diet. And they're finding it really helps their bodies. Are we just getting allergic to absolutely everything healthy?
I think we're becoming allergic to everything.
Yeah.
And
what is this?
Well, I don't know, but I think there are people that are exploring that question, the answers to that question. Yeah, but we live in a more toxic environment. We live with increasing exposure to a lot of things that are not we're not adapted to.
Mm-hmm.
So even if especially when it comes to agriculture or like managing bird flu in chicken flocks, you know, the way that healthy adaptive genes are passed on is that some among a species will get sick and die, and those that survive are more adapted to the current condition. And clearly, you don't want that to manifest on a human level, but those mechanisms are at play. So we're constantly adapting and being told by our environment, hey, this is a problem. And so if you're prescribed medications that cover up the problem, you're not ever going to solve it. And so we kind of have to think differently about how we're the environment that we're creating for ourselves to live in and how we enable that.
Yep. It's the never-ending spiral.
Yeah.
Well, one question before we wrap up. We've all lived through the past 5 years, and there's been a lot of trauma on absolutely everyone. The lockdowns, the mandates, I mean, you name it, vaccine injury. How do you view the events of the past 5 years and the trauma that's resulted from the government overreach?
Let's see. How do I view it?
Yes.
Let's see. I it's funny. The way that I've experienced the last 5 years is that, especially through the lens of Lyme disease and tick-borne illness, I learned not to rely on our government agencies to be proactive and calibrated to serving the people's welfare, as much as their mission statements, and as much as some people really that work within those organizations want to serve human health or the welfare of our nation. Through a process of incentive structures that are misaligned with the end goal, with some negligent or potentially criminal behavior that was self-serving. There have been people that have helped to foster the trauma of the last 5 years. I try to look at things from the perspective is that no matter what people's experiences of the last 5 years have been, or no matter what lens they view it, or they view other people's response to what we've experienced the last 5 years, that ultimately we're stronger by relying upon one another. We're stronger on being more engaged in our government. We have a representative government that requires us to be more engaged and more involved with interfacing with it and saying, this is what we need. This is the transparency we want. This is the bargain, is that it's there to serve us, not we just send money to it and it does whatever. So I try to look at the trauma of the last 5 years, no matter how deep and personal that trauma is, as the only thing you can do with it is take it as a blessing and act with urgency to shape the future into what we would like it to be. And, I don't think we should rely upon an agency to tell us how to manage our own health. I don't think we should really, we need good ethical healthcare practitioners to utilize their expertise to help us. But ultimately, it's our responsibility. Our health is our responsibility. And that's, again, it's recalibrating ourselves so that we're like, oh yeah, this isn't cruise control. We need to know about what's going on. We need to learn more and put more effort into living our responsibilities as American citizens, as family members, members of a community. We have to be engaged and caring, and I think interested in a life of service to others, rather than where some people tend to go with that.
Yes.
So that's how I would put the last 5 years experience into context.
Well, where can people find you? And when someone has Lyme, how do you help them?
I listen, and a lot of times that's people who have been sick for a long time. They've gone through a gauntlet of people who are constantly telling them what they're experiencing and not listening,
Mm.
and then asking questions. And so a lot of what I do is listen to people deeply, ask more questions about what their experiences are, and not just, do you live next to a power plant that's emitting toxins, but, what interpersonal experiences do you have? What's your family history like? What did there are epigenetic changes that occur so that traumas experienced generations back manifest physically for us now. And if we don't have sight into that, or an understanding and a respect for our family members or communities that have come before, then we miss the context of our own existence. So I listen. I listen and I ask a lot of questions, and then help connect people with other people that could be of service to them.
Mm.
That's what I try to do.
Mm. So how do people find you
Well,
if they want to speak with you further?
Well, I may just provide you some information after the fact, because I don't engage in social media. I try to reduce screen time as much as possible and recommend that. I try to be present and listen to other human beings, which I know isn't necessarily how business is conducted these days, but it's the way that I choose to live, and I feel like it's for me and others. We're human and we're meant to interact with each other personally. So
That's right.
I'm a little hard to find, but if anyone needs help or needs guidance or any support, I will leave contact information with you.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
If the average American citizen could do one thing I'm going to change it up. Usually I say to combat the corruption, but to make themselves more healthy, what would it be?
Well, to recognize both systemic corruption and the challenges first to their own health, but then to be extremely proactive and take responsibility for that.
Mm.
We don't live in times where you can just count on everything being delivered to you. I would say more active engagement in our own welfare, and how our systems function, how our government functions, and investing in our communities, in each other, and less of what all of the other forces that we're immersed in tend to do, which is separate us and then give us a solution that costs $19.99 or what have you, just to share music and food and time with one another. I think that's what we need more of, and I think a lot of our healthcare problems arise from a lack of connection to each other and to what our mission's here.
Well, Sky, thank you so much for joining me today. It was wonderful to meet you, and it was a great conversation.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you very much for having me.
Thanks so much for tuning in. Please like, comment, subscribe to, and share our podcasts. I'll see you next week.